Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Two World Podcast. I'm one of your co hosts, Jacob, and I have with me today my other co host, who is.
I am Barney.
And Barney and I are looking forward to talking with you about some of our favorite Bible passages and how they have inspired our lives, maybe impacted how we view something or prioritize something in our lives. And so this morning, we're really looking forward to jumping into that. Barney, you're the one who suggested this topic. So I just want to get started by asking you, how did this come to mind for you? What drew you to it? Maybe you could give us just a little background before we dive in.
Yeah, I think that when I was reflecting on our episode after reflecting after our past episodes that we did on pets, and there was the slide or the photo that I showed that had like some of my key Bible verses that I wanted to keep in mind, keep in front of me that I pegged on top of an image of Calvin the dog, my dog, and
Oh,
um,
yes.
one of them that I realized that one of them was from the story of David in First Samuel, and I thought, it's interesting how we really like reading and enjoy reading. It's fun to read these stories, especially kind of the historical um, recounts from accounts from the Bible, because they flows a lot smoother, than maybe some other section of the Bible can, and you can kind of read it and enjoy it and feel like you're reading something more, um, it's really prose, and but then I thought throughout the week since then, I thought, I wonder if maybe we tend to read them, enjoy them, but how long do we kind of pause to think about them, the stories and their meanings, and do they how how relevant are their lessons? Can we really pull from them even now and maybe apply the things that happened to these people in the Bible to how we're living our lives now? Because these are historical accounts, so it's something specific that happened to a specific person. But what can we take from that to apply to ourselves? And so one of the verses that I had on my that I have on my phone that I think about often, I even thought about it today, um, was after David and Bathsheba got together, and then Nathan the prophet comes, and he just has that little line that says, God is saying to him, and if that hadn't been enough, God would have given you so much more. And I keep that in front of me all the time for the times when, maybe I'm thinking about whether or not I want to go the extra mile, or whether or not I think I should do something that I that like maybe like in the case of today, next week, Halloween parties are coming up, and then next week for school, I would have to. I had a case where they wanted me to work my normal shift, and then after that, go to a different school and help with the Halloween party there. And um, I do have an excuse I could have used to get out of it, and even the person who's running the Halloween party said, no, she doesn't need me there. But then they thought, well, it would be nice, if I could go. But of course, they said, if you have something else planned, it's okay. And then this is kind of one of these crossroad moments, where the verse, I couldn't use an excuse to get out of this because I was clearly thinking about today's episode, and this verse was in the forefront of my mind, and so I thought, this is a time where, maybe just doing what I want to do is enough. But is that is that good enough? If I think about it in terms of, wow, how much more could God have? If that weren't enough, what else could God have given me as well? And then this is kind of the way I'm thinking, applying it to myself, would be, who knows what many blessings, what kind of fruitful experience it could be from, going ahead and going to this party, this Halloween party. So it's kind of moments like these where I find myself, I don't know, conflicted, or wanting to take the easy way out, or wanting to, um, just kind of think in terms of myself first. Where if I think about that first, then I think, oh, okay, I'm ready. I'm able. I can go ahead and do more than my share. And it's something that God wants us to do. And so thinking about that, taking that example from David's life and keeping that in the forefront of my mind and thinking and actions, I realized, wow, these stories that maybe we kind of just enjoy and read through, they really do apply to how we're living our lives today. And of all the amazing teachings that probably people call upon quicker from their mind, from the Bible to apply to how they guide themselves. We can reach into these stories from the Bible too and get a lot of depth out of that too. And then thinking, wow, if this verse means so much to me, I'm really excited to hear what are some of the verses and stories that really reach out to Jacob. And I thought this together would really make a fun episode.
Thanks, Barney, so much for giving some context. That really is a practical example of how your reading of a scripture impacted your response. If I may just mirror back to what I'm hearing, and you can tell me if I have it right.
Mhm,
Um, so, in the original context, um, David is being um, confronted for having
mhm,
taken Uriah the Hittite's wife and
mhm.
had relationships,
Right.
having relations with her, and Nathan is the prophet saying, like, you have all of these blessings from God available to you, but you pick the thing that isn't yours and you go after that, and you've have not thought of the well-being of your neighbor Uriah, and you're kind of I'm hearing saying, like, if we apply that passage in a large sense to our lives of just how do we think of the well-being of our neighbor, if we're called upon to do something and we don't feel like it, there are times when we might say no because, like, we do have some another
Right.
commitment, but there's some
Mhm.
times where it could go either way, and it gives us pause to consider, like, for the well-being of my neighbor, if I show up to this thing, could there be some positive benefit? Am I hearing you right? Is
Yeah, that's a great way to say it. And and yeah, I also think that without incriminating myself, there are times where maybe we feel justified in doing something that might not necessarily, really in the kind of a case where David, where we might, kind of be one of those gray area things. And then this is kind of one of those, um, like those life rings that kind of bring you back, give you refocus your moral center a little bit. And in my case, I think that's also how you could apply it. And yeah, I also with this story right before this verse, I think is where um, Nathan tells that kind of heartbreaking example where he kind of breaks the news to David by saying, here's a guy who has all these wonderful things, and he takes someone else's lamb, that was so cherished, and then serves it up as the main dish for his own festival. And what a great way, what a great analogy to explain what David, to really hit home what David had done. And then how what like a bucket of cold water being poured upon you when you think, oh man, how did I blow it this time? Where I could have had even better than what I thought I wanted, because God is just saying there, if that hadn't been enough, all that you have now, I could have given you even more. Why did, and then it's kind of a pause to think, why did you choose the path that you thought was right when you could have stayed a little bit more morally focused and let God um keep 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 you going on the path that he was hoping for you to take.
this is so interesting because I think the example that you have chosen is one that is this egregious moral failing, like probably one of David's,
Yeah.
of the many stories of David, one of his
Hmm.
greatest. But you've been able to extrapolate from that story like an application for like a lesser prince, like an example that has less what
Yeah.
weightiness to it, but
Hmm. Hmm.
you're still informed by the message, which is so interesting. And that sometimes I think people do the opposite and they take an egregious example and say, well, I'm not doing that.
Oh
So at
yeah,
least,
right.
and they use that to justify, well, it's probably fine if I, don't if I skip the party or don't help out because at least it's
Hmm.
not that. But if what you're doing is actually
Yeah.
the opposite, you're saying, like, if something is out of balance and not mindful of one's neighbor over here, then if you take a smaller example of that, it could still apply over here. And
Hmm.
that reminds me, I know this is going to sound technical, but I was doing a paper once when I was in my doctoral program about biblical interpretation, and evidently the early rabbis, from the in the time of Jesus up into the 500 years after, had this interpretive method called Kal Vahomer, which means light and heavy. And what they would do is they'd argue from a big principle to a little principle, or vice versa. If it's true for this, how much more so for this? And
Hmm.
um and it's kind of like you're using that. I mean, obviously not intentionally like saying I'm using the Kal Vahomer method, but like
Intentionally,
it's
yeah.
taking like a big example, and you're extrapolating from it a more personal, like small application. And you could have gone the opposite direction too, but it's kind of fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a tangent. But I
No.
I, I like how you're challenging yourself to be more mindful, because a lot of
Mhm.
times, you know, I don't know, I hear a lot of encouragement to be what more assertive about boundaries, like make sure you have enough space for yourself. But then there are times when we have to like do what you're doing and say, am I giving it's legitimate for me to put up a boundary, but am I giving enough to receive maybe the good potential that would be there if I showed up? And yeah, um, so thank you for sharing that.
Mhm.
Uh, Well, the passage that I want to talk about is maybe a little obscure for most people. It's from the book of Proverbs, and it's towards the end. It's chapter 30, and this little section is called the words of Agur, son of Jakeh, the Masaite. And this is the only prayer that I'm aware of that occurs in the book of Proverbs, because mostly Proverbs is full of teaching and instruction. But here, this is very much chunks of this part of chapter 30 are a prayer directed towards God. So it's kind of fascinating, even just from that standpoint. How did this prayer make its way into this book of instruction? We tend to think of this type of material more in the Psalms or something like that.
Mhm.
But it is very instructive, and that's what's so fascinating about it. It's a prayer, but it has these deep lessons of wisdom. And so I read this in seminary. I was taking a course on wisdom literature, and it's one of those things when I read it, it grabbed me right away. And at that time, every student could pick a a passage that they would write their main research paper on, and I wanted to write mine on this passage,
Oh,
and I
wow.
just knew like this is what I wanted to do, and I'll tell you why. Um, I'd like to say a few things that read some from it, and then
Mhm.
maybe we could discuss a little bit
Oh,
more.
yeah.
So basically, um, I had never heard the theology in this prayer stated quite so succinctly as it's stated here. And when I read it in a minute, you'll recognize the theology. Um, and if I may be so bold as to say, it resonates a lot with Jesus's teachings in the Lord's Prayer and just some even general themes on the Sermon on the Mount. And when I read it, you'll recognize that. And we've heard a lot, typically, if we've grown up in the church, about simplicity, humility, having a posture of wonder towards God, and of reverence and wonder, and also even towards creation and the world around us. And we've heard about living a balanced life, but but this proverb, these words of Agur, really articulate that well. So I'm going to go ahead and read, if that's all right. This is starting um, the second part of verse 1. I am weary, God, but I can prevail. Surely I am only a brute, not a man. I do not have human understanding. I have not learned wisdom, nor have I learned the knowledge of the Holy One, who has gone up to heaven and come down, whose hands have gathered up the wind, who has wrapped up the waters in a cloak, who has established all the ends of the earth. What is his name, and what is the name of his son? Surely you know. Every word of God is flawless. He is a shield to those who take refuge in him. Do not add to his words, or he will rebuke you and prove you a liar. Two things I ask you, O Lord, and this is the part that really gets me. Here it is. Do not refuse me before I die. Keep falsehood and lies far from me. Give me neither poverty nor riches, but give me only my daily bread. Otherwise, I may have too much and disown you and say, Who is the Lord? Or I may become poor and steal and so dishonor the name of my God. So, um, that line, give me neither poverty nor riches, but only my daily bread. Oh my goodness. I thought, what an interesting posture in life because we might know in that era, in that time, it was quite common for people to believe that if you had wealth and riches, that was a sign of external blessing and favor from God, right? And Agur is saying, no, no, no. There's a
Mhm.
trap there. Like if that's what you're focused on, you could be self-sufficient and deny God, and the similar danger is if you are in such dire necessity that you don't have food and clothing, you'll be tempted to steal. And that will also be another situation where you wouldn't be honoring God. And so the prayer is really a prayer for enough. Like, give
Mhm.
me enough that can live life without worrying about either extreme. It's about balance. And I was so impressed with that, and especially when you lay it alongside the Lord's Prayer, where we literally pray the phrase, "Give
Yeah.
us today our daily bread,"
Mhm.
um, and um, and then there's the second part that Agur is so concerned about um, saying something false or adding something to God's word or doing something that dishonors his neighbor, that he says, I don't want, in doing these things, I don't want to dishonor your name, oh God. And that, like when you lay that alongside the Lord's Prayer about hallowed be thy name,
Mhm.
like this idea of honoring God's name with how we live, like this theology is quite rich, and you can see it kind of feeds into the New Testament vision of life that Jesus gives us. So of of simplicity, of not seeking after things beyond what we need, but also of balance. Like, not, it's okay to have enough to sustain you. And that kind of made me think, oh, in life, I don't want to prioritize the acquisition of wealth, but I think it's also legitimate to have a certain level of resources and
Mhm.
things for my well-being. So finding that balance, this inspired me. And then also the way that Augur talks about with those, I kind of read it more as statements, but they're really questions at the beginning, like who has stretched out the extent of the winds, and who could wrap up the sea in a garment, and who knows the name of the Lord, who knows his son. He's these are rhetorical questions that are meant to like help us realize, wow, we know very little as people, and the universe is so vast, and all the complexity of what God has created is so beautiful and intricate that we should live life with a certain degree of awe and wonder for that. And so I have tried to live my life in light of that. And when I'm in a Bible study, for example, or discussion with people at church, um, I try to keep an element of I use this phrase. I don't know if it'll make much sense, but epistemic humility. Like there's this idea of epistemology, or how we're sure about what we know.
Mhm.
And I think and that can also be the study of how we know what we know, or acquiring knowledge. But epistemic humility for me is about saying, like, I believe firmly what I believe, and I cherish those beliefs, but I hold them with a posture of humility, that I could learn more, that I can learn from others, that I can learn more from God, that I could be mistaken and wrong about things, and realizing my own limits. And if I'm in a conversation with somebody who has a different outlook than me, the words of Augur like remind me, oh, you know, I'm just another human being too. Like, I shouldn't be so obsessed with being right and getting, lording my point over, or being so sure of my point over against what they're saying. It's okay to have humility there, but then in my context of worship to God, or studying scripture, or being in Christian community, oh, I should realize how small I am, and really take that into consideration when I'm talking with others, and I'll try to always be in a posture of learning. So that has translated into how I do ministry. The words of Augur have inspired like how I prioritize the budget in our family with my wife Katie. She's on board with this too. Like when the kids were small, we made it a priority that one of us would always be with them. So there were times when I wasn't working, or Katie wasn't working, or we both were working part time, and we sacrificed that greater financial gain to have more relational connection because we thought that is a wiser, healthier foundation to build a family on and for our kids. And I think those things are part of this vision, in the words of Agur, that of life of balance. So yeah, that's my story. That's my passage. So yeah.
Yeah, I know what you mean about how the beginning reads in a way that you would think that this could be in the Psalms.
Mm,
I think that a lot of it sounds really familiar to like how Psalms are written, and then um, and I know that I too, when I have read through Proverbs a few times. I think I was even at a phase in my life where I remember my mom saying how like, oh, some people read, one chapter of Proverbs a day because, there's 31 of, books or one chapter, there's 31 chapters. And I thought, oh, I'll try that a few times. And I did it a few times. And I always remember being struck so keenly by, that part that you read at the end where, don't give me too much, but then don't give me too little either. And that resonates. The first part resonates, I think, through the when the Israelites are getting ready to go into the promised land, how God is saying, if you get too much too soon, then you'll forget about God.
mm,
You'll think, or if things are too easy for you, then you'll think that yeah, you did it all with your might. It's same with Gideon. You have all these people who rallied to your side. If you go to war with all these guys, you'll think that you did it yourself. How about trying only 300 versus people, countless soldiers that were beyond the measure of who looked like the sands of the seashore, something like that. And then that way people will know that for sure this is something that God did and not that you did
mm.
on your own. And it, we really see this resonate a lot through the Old Testament. And then like you say, in the midst of Proverbs, to read it again, I feel like it really stands out um, in a way. Maybe it's in. I'm thinking it's hearing instead of I wonder if this is kind of the times where we might read and kind of subconsciously, maybe if we're, not really, if we're kind of reading to get through something or just reading along to check off our reading for the day. If some of those times we think, oh, well, yeah, of course, that's what God says, of course, that's what God says. But then here we're having another person, saying it to us and saying it in a way as, at this same era, thinking, well, this is how I'm living my life. You guys really should try this too, which again brings us back to why this belongs in Proverbs. And it's such an accurate point because if you step back and think about it, it's really true. If we have too much, then we it's so much easier to lose track of how we obtained all these blessings and start to think, wow, things are really working out for me. But if we have too little, then it's just hard to keep. We're so, you know, kind of like the Maslow's, hierarchy of needs. We're so focused on the lowest level, just scraping by that it's also hard to keep our attention really fixed on God. But
Mm.
when we're just right in the middle, just right, okay, then I think probably all of us really feel like God is such a bigger, more important part of our lives in those situations. And that's such a great thing to be mindful of and to pray to be able to be in that situation too.
Oh, thank you, Barney. Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that. Would it be all right if I geeked out for a moment a little bit on
Oh
this
yeah, let's do
passage?
it. Oh yeah.
Okay. I want to build on what you're saying. And I'm glad that you actually helped us wrap our heads around why this fits well in the book of Proverbs, because you're right. It is something at the end of the day that is a form of instruction or wisdom that we're to apply to our lives, even though it's in the form of a prayer. So that's good. I'm glad you that you articulated that. But okay, so I want to go into a deep dive just for a moment on the word
Mhm.
for daily bread, the Hebrew words
Oh
used for
yeah.
that, because there's something really rich there. And then, if we have time, maybe if you'll let me jump over to the New Testament and talk about daily bread
Mm.
in the Lord's Prayer. Um, so the words in Hebrew for daily bread here used are lachem, huki. Lechem is bread, and huki is translated in the NIV. What I read is daily, but in other translations, it will be prescribed or
Mhm.
apportioned. And it comes from this word hok, which means something that is prescribed or a certain amount that is set apart or given to somebody. And the implication is that they need. It's could be used for in the Old Testament, the rations that were dedicated to the priests for them
Mhm.
to eat, the portion that was set aside for them. But it can also be used in a broader sense for things that are set aside or portioned for different purposes. But the broader context of the word can also mean a statute or something that's decreed. So, that's getting more to the idea of prescribed, something that's prescribed
Mhm.
or intended for a certain purpose. So if you get this vision, if you look at the word as it's used in the broader context of the Old Testament, it's used often alongside phrases like justice and commandment or decree,
Mhm.
and it's all kind of wrapped up in this idea of God has prescribed certain things for us to do that are within the order of His. If we use the image of a kingdom or a reign, the things that are apportioned or prescribed to us that fit in with His overarching plan and the order that He's established. And so, when you put it in that context, um, and then you read it alongside the Lord's Prayer, where Jesus says, "May your kingdom come." Your will
Mhm.
be done on earth as it is in heaven, then you have this completely larger vision of like the daily bread is not just about the right amount or a balanced amount of what I need.
Mhm.
It is about that, but it's also about like, give me the thing that you intended that fits in with the greater harmony and order of what you're doing in the world. And can I fit into that order too with how I live my life and even to the degree of what I live off of and what I receive? And well, oh man, when you start thinking like that, it's a really powerful, like holistic spirituality. So like, yeah, give me what I need to subsist on, but may my subsistence and life be integrated into the larger order of what you're doing in this world. And so to want more than your daily bread
Mhm.
is to you want to go beyond um, kind of like David in the story you gave,
Mhm.
that all the
Mhm.
the generosity of God and the order and harmony He's created between us and other people, and you want to grab. I mean, not you, but a person in
Right.
thinking that
Right.
mindset would want to acquire something that isn't necessarily in harmony with what God has planned, and so that's that kind of David story, kind of fitting in with this kind of cosmic vision or spiritual vision of right relationship with God and right relationship with neighbor. And this word for daily bread, hoch, um, fits right in with that. That my portion bread, my prescribed bread, the what I need that fits in with your plan. And then when you jump over to the New Testament, the word that's used for daily bread is arton for bread, and then epiousios, which is
Mhm.
translated daily in the NIV, but
Hmm.
the word there is literally means it could there are so many theories about its etymology because it's only used two times, once in the
Oh,
Gospel of Matthew for the Lord's Prayer there, and once in the Gospel of Luke where for the Lord's Prayer
yeah.
there.
Right.
And so
Right.
the theory is Origen, one of the early Christian theologians, postulated that this word was penned by the gospel writers, that they invented it, and the way he did the etymology for it was he took the word epi, which could be on or upon, and the word ousia, which is for like substance or being or existence, and it's like that which is needed for our being or our existence. So, and then from that etymology, you get the idea of something that is required for my subsistence.
Yeah.
So it's given to us daily, but kind of like the idea in Proverbs, it's something that we need to live on. It's some and when you think about that, you think about the idea of manna in the Old Testament, how that was something that was given to the children of Israel daily, but they weren't to keep it
Mhm.
for the following day, or else it would go bad. They were only to rely on God for each new day for what they needed that day, kind of a radical sense of dependence and trust in God. And so if you read epiousios as that which is needed, and then you have it in this context of give us this day our daily bread, give us each day that which we need for the day. then you have this radical dependence. But then, okay, since the etymology is uncertain, there's different ways you can understand those two components of the word. And some understood it for um, the another similar Greek word, which could imply um, uh, for tomorrow as well.
Mhm.
And some people are like, okay, why would you be praying, give us today the bread that would last till like even into tomorrow? And so some have pointed out that the Jewish day typically would start in the evening. And
Uh,
and it anticipates the coming day,
uh-huh.
so then some people thought, okay, that could be the explanation, but then there was yet another. This is the final one, I promise. There were at least two more variations of the Latin translated it super substantialis, super meaning on or upon or over, and
Mhm.
substantialis, that which is for substance or sustaining me,
Mhm.
which is kind of like Origen's reading of that which is needed to subsist on. But sometimes it's read in a spiritual way, like give us the bread that is almost like spiritually nourishing to us. Like you think of the
Oh,
communion bread, something
right.
that has goes beyond just normal
Mhm.
substance. It feeds our soul. Okay. And then the last one is a way of reading epiousios as in, that which is for the bread for the future. Like give us, and that's eschatological or related to God's coming kingdom. Give us the bread
Oh.
that is to be that which is feeding us in the world that you're creating, like more a vision for like kind of like the cosmic order idea we were talking about before. Give us
Mhm.
bread that is like the type of sustenance we would have in a world that's rightly ordered. All of these. And it relates to what God's doing in the world, this idea of a transformation of the world, and a healing of the world into a better place. So all of these are different shades of meaning. I think to me, the most compelling is the first one, like that Origin suggested, um, that is consistent with the Proverbs passage that what we need for to
Mm.
sustain us. But like those other shades of meaning kind of tie in a little bit with some of these ideas of something that's prescribed, that's part of God's kingdom, that's part of this cosmic order that feeds us physically, but also spiritually, kind of. So thanks for letting me geek out there. I just really, that is so rich. And I just think that's one of those things I've carried with me all these years. I did my paper on this in seminary. And so I've carried this with me all these years as something I enjoy thinking about. So,
Yeah, I wanted to comment about that earlier, how when you read through it and the way that you read through it, that I could I could see how it's so impactful and how um that was such a probably really stuck with you that you wanted to use that as the basis for your research paper. And then what you just spoke of now with connecting it with the Lord's Prayer, was that something that you also incorporated into the paper? Or was that something
yes.
that's since then? Oh, I see. At that
And
time, then. Hmm.
and I have to give credit to my professor at the time in seminary, Dr. Paul Overland, who, when he introduced this to our class, talked about that connection and how he had wondered about that before. He said, "Boy, that seems rich, and I wonder, how if we could go deeper with that." And he presented on that a little bit. And then when I was able to do my paper, I did a little bit additional digging for myself. And then this most recently, getting ready for this podcast episode, this past week, I've just been reading through commentaries and lexicons and theological dictionaries about these terms and seeing these different shades of meaning and how rich this discussion is. But it ultimately, I think at the end of the day, what's exciting about it to me is that it gives us a very holistic vision for life about what we prioritize. And when we ask for God's help and when we're seeking things in prayer, how those can fit in actually to like our belief that God is making the world right. And he wants us to be a part of that, the healing and the transformation of our world. And he wants us to be healthy and um, like living an abundant life, like that's grounded in, like you said at the beginning, what God can give us, not what we can
Hmm.
grab for ourselves that we think is better. So anyway, um, yeah, thanks for asking. It's a good question, and I was glad that my professor highlighted that. It kind of set me off on this path. So,
Hmm. Yeah. And it's I'm glad that you mentioned you were reading from NIV, because I was following along with the Bible that I had nearby,
oh yeah,
which is the English Standard. version, and they just in that case, from verse 8, it's just translated as "Feed me with the food that is needful for
Hmm.
me."
Hmm.
And so, so it's interesting that I really like how you're saying with the version that you read for us from the NIV, how it really kind of sets us, gets that notion in our mind of taking this and connecting it with the New Testament, and then when you see those terms, and especially how you mentioned the term in Hebrew, and then when you think about that, and it just really adds that wonderful depth, and I think encourages us to study more and see more that's connected with Old Testament, New Testament, and small little passages that we might miss here and there, and um, you know, taking time to think of this as our daily bread as well, um, than the food that we needed. It really gives us more sustenance, and sustains us even better in that way.
Thank you, Barney. Yeah, it's nice to read scripture in different translations, and
Hmm.
I know we talked about that a while back in a couple of our episodes. That um, just for our listeners, you probably already know this, but yeah, encountering a text in multiple translations gives you different perspectives on the meaning. Since really behind our English are these Hebrew and Greek words, it's wonderful to try to get at them through different interpreters' lenses. So yeah,
Hmm. Hmm.
different translators' lenses. So, are there additional things that you would like to say on your end about scripture inspiring you or impacting your life?
Yeah, I guess I know that we're running close to our set time for today, but talking about all this food, talking about food and substance, it made me think of one of the other parts of scripture that I was thinking about today, which also directly relates to food and being sustained from God and not ourselves. And where I was thinking of the first part of Daniel, I think the Daniel's the first part, the first half of Daniel is so much fun to read anyway, in part because Nebuchadnezzar is such an interesting character. Um, as I was reading through that today, I saw there's two specific, I always Nebuchadnezzar always came across as me as like he's like an all or nothing guy, because there are two there are two parts where one he says, at the beginning he says, if you can't tell me the dream that I've dreamed, then he says, um you will be ripped to pieces limb from limb, and your houses will be torn down.
Oh
And then
man.
later he says, again, he says in chapter 3, he says, if anyone says anything about bad about the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you will be ripped to pieces limb from limb, and your houses will be torn down. And it's just such a character is either you know suddenly he goes to extremes, but the part that I'm thinking of related to food is how right at the very beginning, Daniel and some of the other exiles, they were chosen perhaps for seeming to be wise, seeming to have, seeming to be learned. And here they have two choices. They have the choice to eat. It lists, the best food in the kingdom, the best wine in the kingdom. They have this amazing feast set out in front of them, that it's theirs for the taking. But instead, Daniel says, well, wait, what if we just have water and vegetables? And then the person in charge of them, he's like, whoa, let's take a step back. If you guys end up not looking so healthy and robust after this, I'm on the line. Probably I'll be ripped to pieces, limb from limb, and my house will be torn down. you know? And but but Daniel again has this wisdom and says, let's just try it for a week. And then it shows, because he said he didn't, it says, I was reading the message at this time. It says he said he didn't want to defile himself with things that weren't from, God, that probably some of the food probably wasn't what they were supposed to be eating, or, however it was prepared, that it wasn't something that, in following the instructions, how they should be, it wasn't in line with that. And, and yeah, it shows they were healthier, they were more robust, they were, head and shoulders obvious that the path that they chose by sticking with, kind of bringing this whole thing together, sticking with following God's path for them, you know, gave them even more blessings and made them more successful. And then I also like a part later when Daniel is given knowledge of Nebuchadnezzar's dream. We can connect this with also with Joseph when he was given the interpretation of Pharaoh's dreams. Both of them clearly say, for man to know what this means, it's impossible. But for God to tell us what this means, and in Daniel's case, for God to tell us what the dream was, in the first place, that's possible. And those are two that um, the first part about the food, and then that's especially that second part. Those kind of messages have always really stuck with me, and I always really really like reading that part in Daniel. As much fun as it is to read Daniel because of all the amazing things that happen, I think those two parts really always have stuck with me, and I try to keep them, close to me as I'm living each day as well.
I love how you tell the story, Barney. It when you I forget sometimes how like a number of these um passages are really entertaining. Like I mean, like you said, Nebuchadnezzar is so
Mhm.
intense and like if for the audience, like a modern audience, like geez, oh Pete, like he's
I
just like
know.
going like all out. But the when we're thinking about um the type of food that we eat, boy, that has come up a bit already on this episode.
Yeah.
Like, so let me see. Can I try to make a connection and you could help me
Oh
see if I'm
yeah.
if
Oh
I'm
yeah.
doing it here. So the healthy foods that um it sounded like Daniel, pardon me, was it Daniel, Shadrach,
Yeah.
Meshach, and Abednego? Were all four of them, or was it just at
Yeah, they
this point?
were.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And maybe the group with them. I don't
Probably
know.
others. Yeah.
Um, uh, a big part of why they were wanting to eat the healthier foods is they weren't also it sounds like they weren't wanting to indulge in things that weren't consistent with like what they felt like honored
I
God. It was part
think.
of their
Hmm.
spirituality, right?
Yeah.
Like the way the message phrased it, things that weren't. How did you say that?
Defiling.
Defiling. Okay, so
Hmm.
it's not just like, I mean, yes, it is healthier to eat vegetables, um, but it's also in addition to the health aspect. Um, it's about honoring God or a spirituality centered around like their eating,
Hmm.
right? So the parallel to me between that and Agur and the Lord's Prayer too is it's not necessarily like just the type of food that we're eating each day. I mean, it's how does that food fit in with our mindset and like and honoring God in the bigger picture? So the daily bread could be like pasta or a taco or pizza or a hamburger, but like if those things are eaten in a way that is like appropriate and honoring to God and um I guess then fine. But if our eating somehow takes us into a realm that takes us like beyond like what God's provided for us or what is needed or is excessive or doesn't honor, I don't know. I'm trying to like see here I feel like the bigger principle is about honoring God. Like the food is
Hmm.
the example, but the bigger principle is like, what is our spirituality? And we don't necessarily have the same mindset about um, ritual purity in terms of
Right.
food, like it existed in, ancient Israel. But like, I think we have a sense of, we probably could say ethics around eating. Like, is
Hmm.
the food that we eat, um, but sustainably grown? Is it the labor fair for the people who
Hmm.
produced it or brought it to the table or cooked it for us or um, is it shared with the people around us? Like, is there poverty in our community? Are we giving to help
Right.
other people have food? Like, there's a broader spirituality, and I think that's like what this Daniel passage and the words of Agur and the Lord's Prayer focus on, like not just our own but our own eating, but also the well-being of our neighborhood and the broader world. So,
Yeah. And I really like where what you added to that, and then it brought to mind to me right now, thinking, um, reading just something as simple as bread or as food, it also helps us to remain focused that these are acts, simple things that we can act to worship God and point toward God and keep us in touch with God. It doesn't have to be some really big gesture or some really important time or just some time only on a Sunday or whenever we go to worship. But a daily thing, a daily activity that we do, we can keep focused on God through these simple things that were provided for us. And then in another point that came to my mind is that when you were mentioning about caring for our neighbors, is that when maybe we see something that feels daunting and maybe we're trying to think, well, if I'm eating sustainably or if I'm choosing things that were grown, fair trade or whatnot, it's just one person. Is that going to make a big difference? But then we see in Daniel's case, wow, just vegetables and water for 10 days, a week. And what a big difference it did
Mm,
make. So again, the case of taking that step and trusting it, that you feel like this is what God is saying, that this really what this choice is in line with what God is teaching me. And it's give it a try,
mm, mm,
and again, kind of thinking about David too, the unknown blessings that are waiting, or maybe not just for yourself but for your neighbors and community and for the people that we haven't met who are involved in growing these foods,
mm,
preparing these foods. Or I'm also thinking about our episode about coffee, how it's we mentioned the chart or the mural at Smucker's that showed all the steps it takes to produce a cup of coffee, and how it's really important to be mindful of where and how it comes from. And then if we think about something as simple as our food and where and how it comes from, and can we use it as a worshipful act,
mm,
and then trusting that being the right choice, as in Daniel's case, that not eating these amazing foods in front of him, but making a concerted, intentional choice,
mm,
because he knew that that was in line with God wants it, and then trusting that, I mean, I'm sure that he trusted that it would end up better, but it probably he ended up looking and feeling even better than he thought that he would,
yes.
so beyond what he thought would happen. Again, pointed back to God, and that message, and if that weren't enough, God could provide even more for you.
That's really good, Barney. And what I was hearing there towards the end that you were saying that really resonates with me too is we've talked about it a lot. A posture of gratitude, like you said in our eating, I think you said the phrase maybe, can it be a worshipful practice or somehow help us be grounded or mindful of that God has blessed us and
Mhm.
to be grateful. Maybe you said a way I could add to that. And so, a lot of people will say a prayer of blessing or
Right.
thanksgiving before they eat a meal. Interestingly enough, in the Greek and in early church, they called the portion of the service the Lord's Supper, the Eucharist, which means the Thanksgiving, where you're giving
Uh,
thanks and you're having,
uh-huh.
the gratitude for this the Lord's meal. Um, but um, but yeah, just saying a prayer and being grateful and thankful before one eats is a nice practice. And then was mindful too, if I understand it correctly, maybe you can help me. In Japanese culture, just the phrase "itadakimasu," like before you eat,
Mhm.
is that meant to be like just a sign of gratitude before you partake of the
Yeah.
food?
Right. Yeah. Of again being mindful of directing toward the people who help produce it, and in case of like like eating fish or something like that, the animals that went into bringing this food to us as well. Remembering that we're taking in something that had been living either as through the hard work of the farmer or through the animal itself.
Yes.
Hmm.
So that's a rich concept too. Yeah, even being grateful for the animals and the creation itself. Yeah,
Hmm.
as well as those the farmers and those who brought it forward. I love
Right.
that.
Hmm.
Um, well, thank you so much, Barney, for sharing that passage today. I'm so grateful for how what each part that we brought fit in with the whole.
Yeah.
Like I felt
Right.
like your initial passage, then the one I suggested, and then this last one that you shared, they each
Right.
had connectors, which I thought was
Yeah.
really rich. So thank you for
Yeah.
that.
Hmm. Yeah, and we want to extend our sincerest thanks to all of you who have listened along with us and watched along with us today. And We would love to hear somehow or another some of your favorite passages or stories from the Bible and how you connect them to your lives, even today in this busy world. And we hope that you, as we are looking forward to the next episode. And so, for the Two World Podcast with Jacob, I am Barney, and we will see you guys.